Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. No videos last week because I was sick, but I'm back now and we're back with a bang because today we're going to discuss one of the most important decisions that you have left to make this F1 fantasy season. So don't go anywhere because we're going to discuss everything about the 3X chip, when to use it and how to use it. Let's get right into it. So the 3X chip then is probably the second most, maybe third most powerful chip in the game, behind the Limitless and maybe the Wildcard, depending on who you ask. And the 3X chip, I discussed that earlier in both of the chip videos that I've made so far on this channel, that the 3X chip should always be used in a sprint race. Why? Well, because in a sprint race you get more points and you're tripling your points. It's pretty self-explanatory. The three sprint races we have left in the season are Austin, which is in, 2-3 weeks' time? Oh, God, it's 3 weeks. I cannot wait for this fall break to be over. And then we have Brazil 2 rounds after that. And then we have Qatar in the final triple header, right? So these are our 3 sprint races remaining. And in one of these, you should use your 3X chip if you haven't already. And the reason why I'm making a completely separate video for the 3X chip is because I believe this is the chip that most of us still have remaining, you know? Most people have used the Limitless, some people still have it. Wild cards are flying left, right, and center. No negatives are like 50-50. Autopilot is also like a 50-50. I think a lot of people have Final Fix remaining, but you can't really plan for the Final Fix in the same way. So the 3X is the one chip that I believe most of you still have left. And the reason for that is because we've been saving it for those later sprint races, right? The later on in the season they get, the higher our budgets are, which means we can afford better, drivers, which then is better because we get more points on the 3X. So it just makes sense why we've been saving it for this long. And I'm going to discuss why you should maybe do it in Austin or maybe do it in Brazil. I wouldn't initially plan on doing it for Qatar simply because it's not one of those races where there's that many overtakes compared to something like Brazil or Austin. But one really important thing that we're going to discuss before we get into all the math and all the different permutations is that in sprint weekends, we can watch the sprint qualifying before making our fantasy decisions. This makes no sense. You shouldn't really be able to do this, but you can. And the information that you gain from a sprint quali is super, super important. So don't commit to using your extra, your 3X, your extra DRS in any of these races until you've seen the sprint qualifying. I might go into Austin, thinking I'm going to use the extra DRS here, but then look at the sprint qualifying and see that it either doesn't really line up with my team or there could be possibilities for bigger swings in one of the future races. So as always, wait until the deadline, don't make any decisions yet, and even more important when it comes to this chip and the sprint races, because we get so much information from these sprint qualifying. So what is the extra DRS chip? Well, it essentially gives you an extra DRS boost. It doesn't just turn your 2X boost into a 3X. It actually gives you an entirely separate DRS boost that is worth 3 times the point. So as you can see here, this is on my second team, where I haven't activated it, but I've just shown you what it looks like. So first, when you go to activate it, it pops up like this. It says select a driver for extra DRS. And I selected Lando Norris here, and then because I had my 2X on Lando Norris before I clicked this, it then said select a driver for DRS boost, which is the regular 2X. So this is the reason why I've been saving this chip for so long, because you need 2 good drivers in your team. If you don't have 2 good drivers, there's no reason to use this because you're essentially wasting a 2X. Yes, you still get 3X from your main driver, but if you are sitting there with a single premium driver team, you have something like Lando Norris, Yuki Tsunoda, Kevin Magnussen, Nico Hülkenberg, and I don't know, Esteban Ocon, right? Or Lance Stroll, maybe. If you have a team such as that, there's no one of those 4 drivers that you really want to put the 2X on. So you really want to switch to one of these meta 2 premium teams that most of us are running right now. But this is what happened, this is how it looks like, and this is why we've been saving it for so long. As for just the ideal 3X chip, this is the basics, right? Obviously, watch sprint qualifying. I put that there as a reminder. But it's Norris plus one of these 4 drivers, being Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, and Max Verstappen. Piastri, because the McLaren is the fastest car. So even if Norris wins, Piastri should be up there. And then we have the 3 drivers that I do believe are at the forefront of their teams. I wouldn't be putting any 2Xs on Checo or any 2Xs on Carlos Sainz when Leclerc has been so consistent. Mercedes is closer. I will say, because Hamilton can pop up with stinkers, whereas, I wouldn't say Hamilton pops up with stinkers, I would say Mercedes pops up with stinkers for Hamilton, and then George Russell just does well. So George Russell and Hamilton is closer than the other two, but I wholeheartedly believe that if you're going to put the 2x on anyone, it should be either of these 4 drivers, and then Norris should get the 3x. Now, this could change with upgrades. We know Red Bull are bringing upgrades to the Austin Grand Prix, or it's rumored that they will. So this could change, but just based on what we've seen in the past couple of races and how fast McLaren has been, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the baseline for the 3x will be Norris plus 1, and presumably Norris plus Piastri. But what we have been seeing so far are regular weekends. We've not seen a sprint weekend in quite some time, since, back in Austria. So we have a really important thing to consider, and that is C tiers in sprints are really, really good, right? And this is the whole reason why we had that entire discussion earlier in the season, why you shouldn't use your limitless chip in a sprint weekend, but rather in a single race weekend. And that is because your C-tier drivers, the drivers that usually fill up your team, Lance Stroll and below, those drivers that are usually not getting many points, are better in sprint races than most other assets, right? And I've taken an example here. Say we get to Austin, we have the sprint, and Lando Norris starts P1 in the sprint qualifying and finishes the sprint in first place. That gives him 8 points, because you get no points for the sprint qualifying, right? And then you take something like Kevin Magnussen, maybe he qualifies P17, right? And that Haas being a fast car, he overtakes, Pierre Gasly, he overtakes Bottas, he overtakes Lance Stroll, and he overtakes, Esteban Ocon. And he finishes the race in P13. The sprint race, that is. That is 4 overtakes and 4 positions gained for a total of 8 points. The same as Lando Norris. And that is why, that single point difference is why sprint races are so bad. And I've taken the best option here in Lando Norris. The reason why, by the way, it says approximately 8 tiers, because maybe someone DNF'd, and that's, maybe he only has 7 points because he only did 3 overtakes. Or maybe he did 9 points because he did an extra overtake and then, lost it and whatever. You get what I'm trying to say with this. This is the best Norris case, right? Take someone like a Carlos Sainz, who starts in P5 and ends in P5. No overtakes, maybe 1. He ends the race with 5 or 6 points, and suddenly you have Kevin Magnussen down here who's outperformed him. And this is what we're talking about when we mean that C-tiers are better in sprints, because it's easier for them to sort of get up to the points that those top drivers normally get to. If Norris starts in P1 and ends in P1 in a regular race, he gets 35 points for that, right? 10 points for pole, 25 points for the win, and probably points for some overtakes, and probably points, when he's pitting, and probably some points from driver of the day and fastest lap too. So in a world like that, or in a regular race, Kevin Magnussen, going from P17 to P13, can never reach those types of points. So, but meanwhile, in the sprint races, he can, right? Going P17 to P13 is worth as much as going P1 to P1, which I think is wrong. I think they should have a points system for the sprint qualifying and have the deadline be by the sprint qualifying. But that's just my opinion. Maybe we'll see that next year. But this is how it's like for this season in 2024. So C-tier drivers are good here. C-tier drivers are good in sprints. What does this have to do with the 3X? Well, what's even better than a C-tier in a sprint are bad qualifying Formula A in sprints. What I mean by Formula A is, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, who are always super far ahead of the rest of the field. That's Formula A. And take someone like Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton has not been perfect in qualifying recently, and you could see shockers like this happening. I mean, we saw Ferrari get eliminated in Q2 recently with Carlos Sainz, and it wasn't too far ago that Hamilton went out early and didn't make it to Q3. Say we watch the sprint qualifying, and Hamilton is the one who ends up P17. I think in a sprint race, in a track such as Kota and Brazil, I think there are enough laps and enough pace in that Mercedes to overtake most of the back markers, as long as Hamilton would get a decent enough start. So I can definitely see someone like Hamilton, someone like Carlos Sainz, maybe not Perez, because he struggles to overtake in that Red Bull car, but most of Formula A, Russell as well, Piastri definitely, could definitely get from P17 up to P8. And in that case, if there are that many, overtakes, there's never any pit stops, right? So he would get a sizable amount of overtakes here. Positions gained, 1 point for finishing in 8th. That would be 19 points. And you can see here why it's so important that we watch the sprint qualifying, because the sprint qualifying can give us this information. If we see in the sprint qualifying that Hamilton starts P17, suddenly Hamilton is the best option for that race and everyone should go off and buy him. And this is why the ideal 3x might not be so simple as just saying Norris plus one of these, because if something like this were to happen, then obviously Norris plus Hamilton would be the correct option to go for. And in a case such as this, Hamilton might even be the correct 3x option over someone like Lando Norris. So the ideal 3x, this plus this, and then watch sprint qualifying. And if it's Hamilton who ends in P17, then it's obviously Lewis Hamilton who is the companion for that Lando Norris with either the 2x or the 3x. If you think Norris is going to, sweep it and win in the race, qualify pole in the actual race as well, I still think you put the 3x on Norris. But if it's looking like it's a close race and maybe Piastri can stick in there with a pole and a win, and maybe Leclerc could Ferrari could challenge, maybe Max is back with the upgrades from Red Bull, then maybe you just put the 3x on Hamilton in this situation. So this is the ideal 3x, but we have a problem. We've talked about Piastri, we've talked about Leclerc, we've talked about Hamilton. And I don't know if you know what my team looks like right now, but this here is my team, right? I'm running Lando Norris plus Oscar Piastri. And I think a lot of you are running similar teams. You're running 2 premium constructors. You have Lando Norris plus one more. Maybe it's Leclerc. Maybe it's Russell if you have a bit less budget. How on earth do you fit in Lando Norris plus Verstappen? Because what if Verstappen is the second best option for that 2x? What if you want to go Lando plus Max? How do I possibly fit that in here? Max Verstappen is 31.6 million. I am way too poor for this. That is what we're going to discuss for the rest of the video. How on earth we go about doing this if Max Verstappen is the option that we want to go for. Something like this, right? What I just showed you. What if you want Lando Norris plus Max Verstappen? I'm personally missing 4.6 million to buy a Mercedes Constructor here. So there are people out there that have budgets that are above me by more than 4 million. And if so, congratulations, you don't really have to listen to this next part. So how on earth do we fit Max Verstappen in? What sacrifices can we do? Let's talk about constructors. This may seem like something out of the blue, but one way to fit Max Verstappen into this team could be to get, why do you have to get Mercedes? Why not go for Aston Martin or Williams? Williams look pretty fast now with their upgrades. We need to discuss constructors and why are C-tier constructors in particular not viable. Let's take an example. You may ask me, which combo is better? Assume the rest of the teams right here are identical. Do you go for Ferrari Constructor plus Alex Albon, or do you go for Leclerc plus the Williams Constructor? It may seem like it's an even decision, but it's actually not. Let's break down a constructor first. What is actually part of a constructor asset? You have Williams here. Within Williams, you get all the points apart from driver of the days from Alex Albon, Colapinto, as well as the constructor specific points. And what I mean by that is specifically, the bonus points that the constructor gets for both their drivers making Q3, for example, as well as fastest pit stop points. So this is what's included within a constructor. So if we go back to this example, what we're really asking is this. Is it Albon plus Ferrari constructor points plus Leclerc plus Sainz, or Leclerc plus Williams constructor points plus Colapinto or Albon? So what happens if we then click on these and remove what is, the same on both sides? We can actually see what the difference between these two options ends up being. And if you just look at this side, which side do you think performs better? The actual difference is Sainz plus the Ferrari points versus Colapinto plus the Williams constructor points. And this seems super obvious to me, and you can go look at every data. I'm not even going to show you it. This side is obviously better. Not only are Ferrari more likely to get both drivers into Q3, they're also better at They're also better when it comes to fastest pit stop points. And Sainz usually, almost always, gets more points than Franco Colapinto or Alex Albon or Logan Sargent or any other C-tier option. I mean, this could be, this could be Alpine and Pierre Gasly. It could be Haas and Kevin Magnussen. The difference doesn't matter. The team doesn't matter here. I just used Williams as an example. So you're asking what the difference between these two are, Leclerc, Albon, but the actual difference between the two teams ends up being Sainz versus Colapinto. And that is why C-tiers are not viable as constructors. C-tiers just aren't viable in a regular race. But then what about sprints? Because if you remember, we just talked about C-tiers being good in sprint races. And it turns out the constructors are actually similar. Because in the sprints, there are no points for fastest pit stops, and you get no quali points. So the actual difference between this, this example, if you just isolate it to a sprint race, actually just ends up being Sainz versus Colapinto. And in this instance, you can definitely see Colapinto outscoring Sainz. So maybe you can see where I'm going with this. Is it worth it to have a C-tier constructor in a sprint weekend so you can fit in Norris plus Verstappen? And that's what we're going to dive into the maths, right? And you can see here with the budget funds of switching Mercedes to a Haas, for example, I could upgrade George Russell to Max Verstappen in my second team, and I could also afford to switch Valtteri Bottas to Yuki Tsunoda and upgrade on the C-tier side. Because we already discussed about how many points Carlos Sainz is going to get in a sprint race. P5 to P5 is worth 4 points. An extra overtake in there might be an extra point. Colapinto, this is just, guesswork. P14 to P11 turns out to be 6 points. But remember, looking at where drivers end up in the sprint qualifying doesn't just go for those A tiers, Hamilton starting P17 or whatever. It also goes for the C-tier assets. Say we have someone like Colapinto, who we know is fast in that Williams, starting from P20, or you can assume on that he's going to, climb in rank and do some overtakes. Same goes especially for my example that I showed earlier, Kevin Magnussen. Right? Kevin Magnussen has been Mr. Consistent when it comes to getting overtake points and positions gained. That's why he is the asset that has risen the most in price this year. This season in F1 Fantasy. He just consistently gets knocked out relatively early and then climbs enough, does enough overtakes, and ends up with a positive score of like 8 or 6, 8, 9 points, and ends up increasing in price, getting a good solid score for his owner. Let me remind you, Kevin Magnussen started the season at 6.2 million. He was the second cheapest asset, just ahead of Logan Sargent. So incredible gain on consistency from Magnussen when it comes to F1 Fantasy points, because Hulkenberg is so good in qualifying that it kind of undoes his race sometimes because he can't climb further and thus gains no extra points for that. Whereas Magnussen always consistently starts a bit further back but has the car to be able to climb. So let's continue using Haas as an example, right? And what I did is I went over to F1 Fantasy Tools, again, fantastic website. And what you can do is, if you go to race results, and you just unblock the sprint section, because I don't want to see the sprint points, I just want to see the race points now, right? We already know that, Haas can definitely outscore Ferrari in a sprint race. Now let's actually look, how many points do Ferrari get in a race weekend? Or in a regular race, right? And if you look at the average score here, Ferrari's average score is at 52.2, whereas Haas Constructor is at 13.4. What this ends up being is an average of 42.4 points over the course of a race, right? And now the calculation then becomes, with the extra points that Haas can gain over Ferrari in a sprint race, plus, the points from the sprint, and then you have 2x on Verstappen over someone like 2x on Piastri, and then plus an upgrade on the C-tier side. I put Magnussen in here because with my budget on my main team, I can afford to go to Magnussen from Bottas. On my second team, I could only afford to go to Yuki Tsunoda. So it may depend on your budget which C-tier this is, but I'm going to go for Magnussen here. The reason I'm going for Haas is just as an example. This could be any C-tier asset that looks to be strong in that race because they qualified further back. So the calculation then ends up being sprint points. The race we already know is roughly 42 points. I've rounded down here. where the Ferrari option outscores the Haas option in the race by 42 points. Over the course of the season, in both sprint and race, just total points, Max averages 5 points over Piastri. So with a 2x on Verstappen over Piastri, that would be, on average, a 10-pointer. And then you have the C tier, and we're going to assume that upgrading the C tier brings you 10 points. So what I did to determine that plus 10 points is I went to this, I boxed everything in here, but I'm just looking at the sprint races. Miami is a really, really good indicator for this. Take Yuki Tsunoda here, who finished with 23 points in Miami, or Shogun Yu finished with 20 points after all the overtakes and positions gained that he got, compared to someone on the lower side, maybe like it's a big jump down here, I know, but say like an Albon at 10. At that point, it's a 10-point jump. So say you pick the best C-tier option, which I do think with hindsight and looking at sprint qualifying, I do believe that you can relatively accurately predict who's going to score big in the weekend in terms of the C-tiers. I'm going to just put that at a 10-pointer, but this is purely on feel, but just to make it easy on the calculation, right? And then you look at the sprint points, right? So here we have Haas, but let's specifically look at Miami here, and this little note I have here. Look at VCarb here, who got 19 points. This is just in the sprint race, by the way. No, you can see the 0 here, so this is just in sprint race points. China was a really, really bad race for C-tiers because of how the qualifying ended up, whereas Miami was a really good sprint race. Miami was a really good sprint race for the C-tiers based on how the qualifying lined up. So you see how VCarb, Williams, and Kick outscored Ferrari and Mercedes and McLaren. I mean, McLaren had a DNF, but still. So in these types of scenarios, this is what you're hoping to gain. You can gain a couple of points if you pick the right C-tier constructor. I have Haas here as an example, but this would only be Haas if Haas performed badly in the sprint qualifying and they have a good car that can rise in the sprint, right? So with all of those assumptions, I know we're making assumptions here, nothing here is guaranteed. I've tried to calculate an average point of how many points you would lose or gain if you were to go for a C-tier constructor for one race. And it doesn't look like it's worth it initially, right? You have 5 points for the sprint. That's most what you're going to gain over something like a Ferrari. And then you have 10 points from Verstappen. He has 5 points more on average. I've just doubled that because you have the 2x on him. And then you get 10 extra points for the C-tier. But in the race, Ferrari outscores your Haas asset or your Williams asset by 42 points. So that's an average estimate of negative 17 points. But that it with Max's average score, like Max's average points scored compared to Piastri specifically, because I have Piastri. If you have Leclerc, you can compare with Leclerc, but the points themselves. But this is with Max's average score, and here is where the kicker is. If this happens, a bad quali Formula A in sprints, like we discussed with Hamilton being P17 early, these are the drivers in a sprint race that have the most potential for points. Take Piastri, which I have in my team right now, getting P2 to P2 for a 7-pointer in the sprint. And then you have Max with a bad qualifying starting in P17, definitely can climb to P8, 19 points. And this is where the money is at, because if we then redo the calculations with the difference here, which is 12 points, double that because we're only doing 2x, we're not even discussing Max's 3x potential here. At that point, the average estimate would be that you go plus 7 points by going for a C-tier constructor. Well, Max is Max. Max is not going to put it P17. Well, maybe not P17, but again, that's the average points scored if he starts P17. This is an article from planetf1.com. More penalty woes for Max Verstappen with another power unit grid drop predicted. He's already taken one penalty drop this season. Former F1 driver Albers does not expect Verstappen to navigate the final 6 rounds of the F1 2024 campaign without taking another engine, which would mean a 5-place grid drop. And if he were to have a poor qualifying at a P8, drop down to P12, and then you put the 3x on him instead of just the 2x, because that, the calculation that I just showed you was with the 2x, it's a lot of if, buts, and maybes. This article in particular, theoreticized that he would take this in Brazil. Now, this is not confirmed. This is mere speculation. But if that were to happen and we get news that Max is likely to take an engine penalty in Brazil with 5 points, Now we're starting to approach the, you would want Max, right? Because Max can take over, can get overtakes, and can be really, really good in the Brazil. And if Max and Norris look to be the two highest scoring drivers, you would want them. And in that instance, it could be potentially worth taking a seat here. And this could be a hell of a lot more. This is with Verstappen 2x, reminder. Verstappen 2x here. This could be Verstappen 3x. Again, this is if he starts P17, and he gets the average score in the race, but he could have a really good race. He could get a driver of the day, and suddenly, woo, he could go P2 in the race above Piastri, and in that case, he would gain even more than 5 points over Piastri. So, again, there's a lot of ifs and buts here. Things that could go really wrong, things that could go really, really right. But just on a, crude average and just estimation and guesswork, you can see a world. You can at least see a planet where this could occur. So what is the conclusion? Well, if Max qualifies badly in the sprint, in any sprint, it would be worth it to go for a CT Constructor to fit him in alongside another premium. Now, again, if you have infinite budget and can fit in Max Verstappen with a George Russell or Max Verstappen with a Lando Norris without having to upend your team to buy a CT Constructor, it could be worth it. And again, a quick mention, obviously you're not downgrading your second driver. You're not running like Fernando Alonso plus Max Verstappen because, what are you doing? You're playing your 3X. You still want two premium drivers. There is a world where Max Verstappen could qualify badly, and if he does so, then maybe it's worth going for a C-tier constructor. A lot of rambling about it, but I just think it's interesting because C-tiers, I've been trying to look for any opportunity to fit a C-tier in, but it just hasn't occurred, and this could be the one time. But it would require this to happen. So the actual conclusion is, if nothing crazy happens, just do the 3X with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in Kota probably. But watch the sprint quali, and if you want to hear my thoughts on what you should do with your 3X chip, be there for the sprint quali watch along in Kota. We're going to be watching it on the Friday evening European time. I can't remember off the top of my head what time this would be at, but watch the sprint quali with me and we'll all discuss what the best 3X options look likely to be then live. More videos coming out, my team selection video, all of that good stuff ahead of Kota will be out in the coming weeks. So subscribe so you don't miss it. Let me know down below if I am crazy for even considering this. The answer is I'm probably not considering this unless this ends up happening. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, like it. Tell me, am I stupid? I feel like I went through so much. I just want to play Haas one time, man. That's all I want to do. I just want to play Haas.